Hello, and welcome to the start of our series where we dig into the risks, realities, and responses to third party interference across the Cadent gas network. Throughout this series, we will be your hosts. I'm Geoff Radley.
And I'm Dan Mee, and we're bringing you expert insights from across the industry. This series is all about damage prevention, exploring how uncontrolled third party activities can pose serious risks to people, infrastructure, and the environment.
We'll be speaking with industry leaders, asset owners, and innovators to understand how we can better manage these risks, share best practices, and shape a safer future for everyone.
So, whether you're an asset owner, engineer, third party, or simply curious about how we protect what's underground, this is the series for you.
In our first episode, we're joined by Richard Broome, Managing Director at Line Search Before You Dig, to set the scene for the series. So without further ado, let's dig into it.
Thanks for joining us, Richard. Could you just tell us a bit about yourself and LS Bud?
Certainly, Dan. So LS Bud, or Line Search Before You Dig, is an online safe digging portal. It's used across the industry from people putting in a rail scheme or road scheme all the way through to a garden fence. And it's there to help people work safely. So our key mantra is safe digging for all. And we're really pleased that we're dealing with about 15 to 16,000 inquiries a day. So about on track for 4 million this year. And that's helping over 165 asset owners. So, yeah, quite big numbers there.
Fantastic. And where did it start for you, Richard? Why damage prevention? Why LS Bud? Where did this all come about?
Yeah, so I've got the sort of official answer and I've got the personal answer. The official answer is I'm a chartered surveyor. So I started off in rural land management, working for a company called Fisher German, who are an owner or part owner of LS Bud. But I can actually, I've made a mistake of opening up to Dan at a recent industry event and telling him the real truth. And that's when I look back, I used to work on our family farm, which was an event centre where people, for horses, for a equestrian event centre, and people would come on a weekend, they still do, to bring their horses to exercise them and to compete at the centre. And so we'd always do loads of different things, loads of different activities and events before to make sure everything's ready. One day I was on the digger, so I was on a mini digger. Here we go. But yeah, so doing a drainage trench, make sure that the place was ready. About an hour before the event, I hit a water pipe, and then oh god, yeah, this was not a good sign because we had about 800 people coming within about an hour of me doing this. So wow. As you can imagine, not a good time to hit something. And as it happened, I struck the water pipe, only a small scale one, but it was an old black pipe for those that are more used to the older pipes. Those pipes that you can't get fittings for at Screw Fix, the ones you have to track down. This is in South Wales, so you had to track down the Imperial fittings. So we got that all done. Got it repaired, and then every single tap, there was a bit of grit in every single tap, so none of the taps worked either. So it was undo all the taps, and all. I come from a horsey background, so I can probably say this with fair authority. But we're not an easy group of people to deal with, and as you can imagine, 800 of them all pointing the finger at one certain silly devil on the mini digger. So I think from that perspective, I understand what happens with the strike and yeah, the implications even on that small scale. Mm-hmm. But I understand that a small scale thing, even something that doesn't affect the public, is very different. How does that differ to Cadent? You've obviously got a huge network across the country. It's a big difference.
Yeah, it is a significant potential risk for us. So we operate 4 regulatory networks covering a large proportion of the UK, and within those regulatory networks, we've got some of the UK's largest cities as well. So across our entire portfolio, we operate in the range of 82,000 miles of pipeline assets. So that's a mixture of high pressure pipelines, major accident hazard pipelines, all the way down to your domestic services that would be going into your property at home. And as you can imagine, sort of managing damage prevention across that extensive portfolio is in itself a challenge, and making sure it's kind of proportional and the controls are appropriate. So for us, it's a continual process of making sure that we safeguard those assets and we prevent damage that could result in catastrophic potential incidents, loss of life, all the way through to loss of supply on our network, which, at certain times of the year, our gas network transfers a significant amount of the UK's energy, and it would put a lot of customers at risk if we lost supply, particularly in the middle of winter. So it continues to be a real focus area for us as a business, and something we're passionate about, always improving.
So just on that, so you've got all these pipes going across the country, and you've got all these people working around them. It must be an impossible thing to manage.
Well, I don't think it's an impossible thing to manage. I think it's something that we need to make sure is tailored to the range of activities that happen across our footprint. And this is something we'll be exploring in a later series. But one of the things we're very conscious about is you could have kind of HS2 works on one side of the spectrum, over a very long duration, major contractors, all the way through to a farmer doing some ditching work in their own fields. So how we interface with all those different stakeholders, how we make sure that we work collaboratively with them and don't prevent them ultimately from doing the work that they need to do is a big factor in how we manage the process.
No, it sounds like a difficult balance.
Yeah. So just to set the scene, Dan, why did we move to LS Bud in the first place, and what opportunities did that present us with?
Yeah, so we've been doing plant protection of some form for many, many years, and what would have started as a regional project in an office, a team of people getting paper plans from developers, third parties, going out and meeting a lot of people on site, managing that inquiry process at the sort of coalface in the networks. Over time, we moved into a bespoke platform that was an online assessment tool that digitised a lot of the local decisions and local risk assessments that were going on. So building in some of those buffer zones and distances. Well, certain activities are okay at certain distances, and others you want to get a bit more closer oversight on. So started with a manual process, moved to a bespoke system-based process. But one of the challenges that we had was the reach into the networks and getting it out to people. So you've got people having plans, you've got people where you've got high-risk works actually having support there, so that when they need technical advice around working around some of the assets that we've got, we need to give them that tailored support. So one of the reasons that we moved to LS Bud a couple of years ago was to sort of benefit from their market prominence. And as you've got a range of members on the platform, starting with that major accident hazard route really provided getting us in that group of organisations, a group of asset owners, so that it was a common type response. And like you touched on around the challenge with the risk and balancing that volume, it allowed us to look at it at a much broader level and try and provide something that was pragmatic but also reached a lot of people. So last year we had probably 1.9 million search inquiries in our area, and around 1.5 million of those had our asset on the map when it was responded. So clearly 1.5 million inquiries a year is you just simply can't personally manage as a human those number of inquiries. So as part of the LS Bud system, we have a risk-based approach and response to protect the higher risk assets and the higher risk works. So yeah, I think that was why, and the challenge is that volume.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's managing that throughput. So we start with 1.5, then you get down to around 50,000-60,000 a year that go through to the networks to really give that tailored advice. So yeah, it's a real challenge, but hopefully one that we're continuing to evolve with and adapt to as we sort of move to a more digital sort of world with a lot more stuff online, no paper records sent to the offices, things like that. So it's a real challenge. But
you must have seen a fair change. I mean, I remember talking to you guys back in 2020, just as lockdown was upon us. I remember sat at my desk at home talking to you guys. There must have been a fair change over that period, because I think we were talking before. You went live in August 21, so we're a few years after that now. How have things changed from your perspective now?
I think so. Well, one of the big changes is the sort of the onboarding through LS Bud with a number of other members. So what's been helpful is we sort of joined some other gas networks on the system, and the change that's happened is you sort of look at the the platform and the portfolio of members that LS would have, and you've got them a much broader range now. So it becomes that, what you touched on at the start, being the one call service. It is definitely becoming that for a lot of asset owners. And the change for us, every year we have more inquiries, every year we have more throughput to operations. And so that market prominence is the real change that's occurred over the last couple of years, and adapting to that's been really important.
Yeah, I think you said before about the pragmatism, and to me that's a critical thing, is that you're pragmatic about what information you can get from someone as to how to risk assess it back, because I think the balance is always, if you ask for too much information, they might not do a search, and then no one knows anything.
Yeah, and to an extent, one of the big things that we've got to do in the industry, we have to trust people. A lot of our processes rely on trust. So if somebody comes to talk to us, that's great, because we've already overcome the first hurdle. We've got to then trust that when we give them that information, they review the information, they take it on board. But I completely get your point around information overload. If we give them rafts and rafts of documents, things to fill out, things to adhere to, it just becomes a barrier. So it's about getting the right balance, and certainly works in the highway for us. Anyone that works in the highway should be trained and competent with NERSWA. So we rely on that and trust that to an extent, and that's why some of our inquiries in that area we just allow to proceed with the caution and the response that we give with the guidance. But again, for some of the assets, because of the criticality of them, we have to give that sort of site-specific advice and potentially supervise the works if we deem it appropriate.
It's also important that we practice what we preach as well. I mean, ultimately, Cadent are an excavator as well. We do a lot of work in the public highway. We do work in fields on our parkline assets. So we follow this, and we need to follow this process as much as we'd expect any other utility or third party to do. And I think it's really important that we also continue to demonstrate that and set that standard. To make sure that we're, as I say, we're practicing what we preach.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we've just come off the last week of the Damage Prevention Day, and one of the sessions there was a round table talking about why things happen, why incidents happen. One of the things I took from that personally was that we do look into strike incidents really well in certain areas, less so in others. But do we ever look at when something goes well and we don't have a strike, of whether we could have improved that? And I think the really key problem is no one's interested when Cadent do a dig and everything goes well. No one. It doesn't make front paper. No, there's no news headlines. There's no posts on X or Twitter, as we keep on referring to.
And there's many examples of that, isn't there? In terms of the millions of inquiries each year passing through the system. Many vast majority of those inquiries pass, and the work is carried out safely around all of these asset types.
Definitely, and and as Dan refers to, the millions of inquiries that go through every year, there's maybe tens of thousands get escalated, but there are millions of inquiries. There's and although there's 1.5-ish, I think million onto Cadent, we handle 600 million interactions across the membership. So that's 600 million. I think it should be 650 million this year. Every one of those is important. Every one of those can lead to someone being hurt and a damage occurring, which is really worrying when you think about it. But actually, that's where you've got to trust that people give you the right information, the systems work in the way that they're designed to, and that people work safely.
And just from that, then, Richard, so what's your observations in terms of how the gas industry's use of LS Bud may differ from other sectors?
Yeah, I think I've got to be careful not to. What's
the leading question there?
But no, it's. I think there's a really good range of people on the system of how they use it, and that's from the user perspective and the member perspective. So the users are the people that use it for a safe digging inquiry, and the members are the ones with assets. I think the gas industry, and it was great to work with Cadent during that setup process, and I think it's fair to say, and I'm always nervous about saying it about other people, but they're leading the way in the gas industry now to sort of look at the huge volume and distill it down to a workable number, because that's the key thing, is that risk assessment. So I think, yes, definitely driving behaviour. I think across the membership, there's a huge range of sectors of members that we deal with, from electricity to gas to water to telecoms and district heating and the like. And you might have that someone sets it up and they've got all the experience and they've got decades of experience and they know exactly what the right thing to do is, and then someone else takes over. It might be a management buyout, a venture capitalist, or whatever it might be of a smaller network, and they have a different priority, and they inherit a system and they go, not really sure what this does, guys, because it's just ticking over in the background. And that's one of the challenges we have is trying to make sure people think about preventing damage every day. And it's something that, going back to that little anecdote at the beginning, I certainly wasn't thinking about not hitting a pipe that day. And I don't think most people, even the streetworks gangs, I don't think they go out thinking about underground utilities. They know it's something they've got to avoid, but they're thinking about their pay, what they need to do, what the weather is, whether they've got the equipment on site. Actually, what's under the ground or even overhead at times isn't number one priority. And from our members' perspective, it's about trying to elevate that to make people more aware. So there's a real variety.
I think on that, I think as an excavator, I think you become aware of your environment and you become comfortable in your environment to an extent. So they're working around underground services every day. They know the risks there. They know that's present. So I think what's important for us is providing that escalation and that identification when something is out of the norm, be it a high pressure asset, be it a certain type of works that they're doing, be it something like tunnelling, directional drilling. Those are sort of out of the ordinary activities that could potentially create a higher risk. And I think it's interesting with the sort of different approaches. And I think one of the things you touched on around reflecting when things have gone well and on things that you can improve on. So I think one of the things that we are trying to do and sort of encouraging others to is whilst we're sharing incidents and near misses and things like that, and well, did we give all the information to help them safe working wise? Did we give them all the information that we've got on an asset, that we've got on a particular area? Do we have potential gaps in data? Do we have potential information stored in different systems that could aid the person on site? Because ultimately the person on site, like you say, they've got a million and one other things to think about, and they've got potentially paper records, electronic records that may be in the van, aren't with them at the point of the works, and it's about us putting ourselves in their shoes and trying to think about how we can make that easier and more informative for them. So I think it's important that we continually reflect on the good behaviours as well as the incidents and near misses.
Absolutely right, and those, and trying to distill what those behaviours are across basically the public. Because you are dealing with someone that works on a road scheme, but you're also dealing with someone that's working in their back garden. So trying to get into their headspace of what their challenges are and how to get your message up their agenda is hugely difficult, but something that I don't think we'll ever stop doing. I think you sort of think about the future of safe digging, and you think about where to go, but actually that engagement piece, and it's not just engagement either, because when you get someone to do a search, if they've never done a search before, say it's a next door neighbour, and they see something, they see some literature from Cadent, and they go, right, you've got to do a search. So they log on, they might get a bit of help knowing what to do. They do the right thing, and they do a search. They do a search, they get some information back. Do they give it to the person doing their driveway? Yeah, so you can do. The really hard work is getting them to do the search, but actually getting them to communicate it through even just that short supply chain is hard. So when they've got a major supply chain, it's even bigger. And sometimes we find that they might just send a map. They might not send the information or the guidance. And trying to get that right every single time is a real challenge. But it's on us as an industry to make sure that's done in the best possible way. Not make things too onerous, not make things too complex, but simplify them and get the message out accordingly. And it's something that I'm sure engagement experts would be very interested to put their 2 penny worth on how to do that better. But we're all ears on how to do that.
And it's an interesting point you make there, Richard, because certainly from our experience, we've seen a few assets historically that have related to that interface between, it might be a landowner and a contractor that they've brought into a specific piece of work with them, or a homeowner doing some work at home, where actually as part of the investigation you tease out that the owner of the property or the land involved does know our asset is there and does know there's a process to be followed, but somewhere in the process of putting someone else to work, that information has been lost in translation or not passed over. And I think a key area that we just need to continue to drive away at is trying to reach all of these parties. So even if I'm a contractor working on someone's land, if I haven't been given that information by the landowner, actually in my mind I'm thinking, oh, maybe I need to think about whether there's any buried assets, and do I ask the landowner the question rather than just assuming he's going to give me that information in the first place. So I think the wider the reach across multiple industries and anyone undertakes excavation work across the UK, the more impact we can have
Definitely
across the subject.
I think you're absolutely right. I think our team have been thinking of, can we go to hire companies? Can you go and put stickers on their machine? But do they really want stickers on their machine? That's the sort of thing you're up against. It's the right thing to do, but can you encourage them to do that sort of thing? Mm-hmm. Do you go to the fencing operators? Do you go to the ditching operators? Do you go to the agricultural organisations, the NFU and CLA, and all, lots of different organisations? How do you make it more important for them, and how do you keep that on top of their importance? Because they might do one session in a season, but then do you do the next year? Do you do the year after that? How do you make it regular?
And it's one fresh. It's one thing going to the conferences, going to the head offices, and speaking at that sort of level to the safety teams and things like that. But it's getting the message right the way down to the people undertaking the works. And I think one of the challenges is like we've talked about the range of different projects that can go on in this space, and we have the different stages in which we can influence it, and we want to get in at the design stage. We want to design out a lot of these risks. We don't want to be relying on the person at the end of the machine or the shovel in some instances where they're in an area, in a potential environment where they could hit an asset they don't know about. So it's really important that before the project, we sort of make people aware of where the assets are. Like you say, that general awareness piece of, well, generally people working in the highway, they know that if there's properties, they're going to be gas, water, electric minimum. There's going to then be fibre, there's going to be sewer, there's going to be other things in the ground. It's the scenarios where we're outside of that highway environment. We've not got then the control on who's working there. Well, not to say control, but the awareness of who's working there. And in private, I could go and dig a hole in the back garden, front garden, and it's that sort of wider awareness and public awareness piece that's the real challenge. And that, talking, not necessarily always talking about a high pressure asset here, we're talking low pressure services. Majority of houses in the UK have them. There's still a risk.
Well, it's interesting. I was a couple of international anecdotes on that. Is that I know in the States they managed to get their biggest DIY retailer to put an 811 sticker on the spades. Wow. And you kind of go, that's a good idea. And then I think it was Telstra in New Zealand was saying that they're going to try and get things on the customers' bills. And you go, well, that's different. Whether or not they get a paper bill anymore, and it's probably moved on a little bit. Yeah. But actually, if you get that level where the suppliers for the gas industry could put something about working in your domestic property, why not? So there's opportunities out there.
And that's it. It's you're going from mail shots, aren't you, as one extreme, which how many people open the letters, how many people read the letters, how many people understand the letters. That's one extreme of it, where, like you say, you want to try and target on the handle of the shovel, on the key on the digger. They're the sort of things that might just be that jog in the memory.
It could be, that sort of Swiss cheese model, isn't it? That's the last one. That's the last one you want to do, but it could be the most effective. But as you said earlier, if you can get the planning design stage beforehand, then it's certainly going to stop as many flowing through that model.
And the piece about services and almost not becoming complacent at the lower pressure tiers, I think is a really important one too, because that's where the volume is in terms of inquiries is lower down in the pressure tiers in our network by sheer virtue of kind of the makeup of our asset base. But with any kind of damage, there is always some associated safety risk with it. There's downtime, there's disruption to customers, potential follow-up actions for the individual or the organisation involved. It's illogical for anyone to wish that on themselves or on others. So collectively, it makes a lot of sense to work together to see how we can continue to avoid that going forward, irrelevant of whether it's a low-pressure service or a 50-bar gas main.
I think absolutely. I think if you're in an area and you've got an electricity company and a water company, what's the point of you all trying to get a separate message out to that one person with the spade in their hand? with absolute respect. Yeah, they don't care.
No.
They want to hear from one person.
How do they work safely?
Yeah, and they want to work safely whilst they're digging the hole around the electricity, water, gas, fuel, whatever it might be. But sort of collaborating to get that message together is a key thing.
And that takes us on quite nicely. So we're launching this first episode on the first day of Digging Safely Week, and we've obviously got some comms internally recognising that we're an excavator, but then also externally as the asset owner and trying to get that message out into the community. So just from your perspective, obviously with Ellis Bud doing a lot of support to that Safe Digging Week, could you just give us a bit of insight as to what it is?
Yeah, definitely, Dan. We do two things. One is Digging Up Britain, where we publish the data on what's gone on across the country, and we use that information to help people understand what's going on. So that report's just been launched last week for this year, and then we also do host or support National Safe Digging Week. It's something we started in 2019 because we saw with the USAG report. So the USAG is the Utility Strike Avoidance Group, which we're a proud member of. We saw through the reports we were getting in there was a spike in July, and we thought, hang on a minute, let's do something about this. Let's help. Let's help people focus on why these strikes are happening. Take a bit of time out and bring up the importance of whether it be a toolbox talk, social media share, whatever it is, but to be able to get involved to spread the message far and wide.
Yeah. And what's a theme for this year?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So I was going to get told off by my head of marketing, but no, it was a collaboration. So collaboration in terms of being able to work together, and we saw that in the Damage Prevention Day last week, where it was quite interesting. There was an asset owner, and he was quite sure of his view on something, and just before that we got everyone to sit in different seats all around the table, so they weren't allowed to sit next to someone. Controversial. We didn't say that until they sat down and we moved everyone around. But he sat next to a contractor, and he said, well, the reason for this is XYZ, and the contractor said, no, it's not. and actually, by the end of it, they hadn't fallen out, which was nice. But by collaborating and working together, they went, actually, I can see your point, and I can also, the others, and vice versa, they can see the other point. So it's about coming together to come as one industry. So firstly, for asset owners to come together, whether it be the gas network, as I know, Dan, you've been dealing with across those network forums, but gas, electricity, water, and fuel, and anything else with the telcos as well. But actually with the contractors and the users as well. So we are one industry, and to steal a saying, it's a shared responsibility. It's not one or it's not the other, it's together. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of people miss, particularly with our service. Actually, they say, right, you just supply maps. Okay, that is a fairly fundamental part, and when that's the thing we focus on. But what it is, it's people giving information, the asset owner being able to choose what to do with that information, and then provide the appropriate response. The map is one part of that, but it's about that exchange, and I think that's something that's often missed. So collaboration couldn't be a stronger theme for us in terms of working together and being able to raise the profile, if it is even for 1 week only. But it'll be a focus week, and we hope people can take that through for the rest of the year too.
I think that maturity piece is really important, actually, because I know when I've gone out and had meetings and conversations with third parties before, where we've had a history of near misses or incidents with them, that there absolutely is a recognition of kind of why it's important. There's absolutely a commitment to work with us on that in terms of improving standards. But also, quite often there's some feedback for us as an asset owner in terms of how we can make that interface easier and more constructive. And I think there's a big role to play with asset owners. I'm talking about Cadent, the DNOs, whoever it may be, to have the maturity to kind of open that conversation and be willing to listen to the feedback, and then potentially amend your processes off the back of it, because it is a combined effort, as you say, and we need to work together to continue to improve those standards. So reassuringly from my experience over the last sort of 7 or 8 years in this field, when you do go and approach these organisations and have these conversations, very, very keen to work with you and move it forward.
That's great to hear. No, it's as you say, people can always learn something. I think culturally you need an organisation that supports you doing that, and it's very easy for us to say that when hopefully we both work for organisations
Hopefully.
that support that. But there are other organisations that are maybe really pressured with procurement. They might be on tiny margins where change is expensive. I think we have to be able to recognise that as well, in that even good people in organisations that could do better. It's a tough sell, but the more we do, the more we share that information, the better. Then the more we can change the parts of the industry that need to be changed.
Absolutely. So off the back of the damage prevention, really, Richard, and the introduction of the roundtables, how are you guys proposing to kind of cascade that information out now and get it to reach the wider community?
Yeah, well, I think I've got a team that's probably wanting to have a few nights sleep, if I'm really honest, after last week. But I think there's a number of different ways. So we've got a really engaged membership. So we feel it's really important to have a membership that is part of our business, our organisation. So if there's something wrong, they tell us straight up. We don't wait for an annual review. There's a quarterly set of meetings where all of our members come together, or representatives. We've got 160 people in the room. It's probably not going to be the best thing, but representatives of our members and also our users have forums that they can do that. And what we really want to do is hear from those guys, the people with at the shop floor, the ones that are hearing from the people working around their assets, to give us advice on how we can improve. So it's a two-way thing. That, we've got some ideas, we've got lots of information to take from last week's event, not yet written up, but it'll take a bit of writing. But so it'll go that way, but it'll also come back the other way. And there are lots of things to think about over this next year or two. So yeah, there's lots there. I think the social media is always a good thing. It's one of the things we did on the event actually was we did actually print it out. It went a bit old school, but we printed out an incident where someone had hit a telco which was pretty shallow, and saying, what can we do about this? And we printed off all the comments, and it brought out a really interesting debate actually of who was right and who was wrong, what they could have done differently.
Right.
So
Okay.
things like that, when it might not be an asset the other asset owners have dealt with, and it might not be an environment they've worked in, whether it be a street scene against an agricultural field. It's really good to raise that awareness and just broaden our horizons a little bit. So yeah, and that's lots to do.
I think it's important, like you say, about taking the feedback on as the operator of LS Bud, but also that perception of the user and the operator, and getting those people together. Because certainly sitting on the asset owner side of things, you imagine that your service is perfect in terms of how you administer it, the processes you follow. But until you get that user feedback and says, I can't make any sense of this map. Don't know, what does that symbol mean? And you go, well, it's obviously this. And you look in the key and go, that symbol isn't shown. And so it is good to have that feedback loop and that mechanism. And obviously with the groups, having the high volume users, understanding how they use the system and then how we imagine they use the system. And sort of those two things aren't always aligned. And reflecting on that when you have then near misses or scenarios where, well, that they've not followed the process there, well, that's because their process is different. And so you've got to be mindful of that and aware of that when we sort of bring in these systems in place. So it's interesting, and it's some good discussions.
I think one of the things, I couldn't agree with you more, one of the things that's challenging on that is that you have, we start off with high volume users, and there'd be one or two from each company, and you cover off maybe 50% of the inquiries with those few over the small number of companies. But then what do you do with all the householders or all the individuals or the one-offs, because they don't really want to sit on a user forum.
It's a different approach, isn't it?
And they don't want to really use a guide on how to use the system, because that's how the 160 odd members think it should be used. They're going to use it to get the answer they want. So if they just want plans, they're going to submit an inquiry that gets some plans. And so it's making sure that we get the message to them when it's, well, actually, this is why you can't just get plans. This is why you need to do it in a certain way, and this way that the system's designs are set up facilitates that. So yeah, it's really important to get both sides of the coin, but you've got to sort of maintain a set of standards and how you imagine it to be administered.
Definitely.
Just to go off piece slightly, just taking us back to the damage prevention day, Richard. Did you have any attendance from outside the UK out of interest? Have you had any interest from further afield?
We have had interest from further afield, so we have quite good links with our parent companies from Australia.
Okay.
So one of our parent companies, got one based in the UK and one based in Australia, so that's Pelican Corp. They provide services in Australia, New Zealand, America, and Canada.
Okay.
So the US, Canada. And yeah, so they were over, and they were able to. It's always interesting for them because they sit on our board, but they don't see people face to face very often. The travel's a bit of a killer for that.
Yes.
So they've done. In previous editions, we've had. I know we had someone from America doing our keynote, Scott Landers, it was a great keynote when we did our. It was sorry to go back to COVID again, but an online version when we had to do that. But that was fab to hear their perspectives of things. We've had a number of people coming over to the event, but I think what we'd like to do is to try and get more international representation. I think that's a good target for us to see what works well elsewhere, what we have, what we don't really realise we've got. And it was interesting. We were talking with a representative from Canada, actually, but they have a similar system in Canada and North America as a whole. That when someone does an inquiry, they can ring up and explain where they're working. So first of all, that's quite expensive to host that. You have to have a team, a call center team to do that, and they were wondering how they get that online. But when they submit their 811 ticket, then the asset owners have to get someone out to locate it and spray it on the ground. And there's no leniency about how many tickets they input, but the asset owner has a certain timescale to do it, and if they don't hit that, there's a serious penalty.
Wow. Okay.
And it's interesting because you go as an asset owner, I would have thought you'd be starting sweating by now, but we're not set up for that over in the UK. But interesting, it sounds like a sort of perfect scenario because you get a perfect locate by the asset owner, and the user can work really safely. But actually, what we're hearing from there is actually it might be delayed. And it might not be because it's been outsourced. The price has been squeezed, and then the quality isn't quite there. So the contractors actually go, you know what? Can we just do it on our own because we don't want someone doing it? Have you got the map? And you go, wow, okay. So we send out the maps for someone to locate themselves, but in the US where it's all free of charge to get an asset owner to locate it for you, they're actually pushing for maps as well. And I'm not saying that's everyone in the US, but it's quite interesting to see, hear the different
strike the balance.
You're back to trust again, though, aren't you? At the end of the day, and trust and competence, and there's an expectation to an extent that people working in the highway are competent. People working around the assets are competent. They have the same tools and equipment that we do. So, is the locate by the locator any better than the locate that's done by the excavator? In theory, it shouldn't be, because they're trained to the same standard. They can interpret maps and draw conclusions, but it's a completely different regulatory model, isn't it, over there and across the world. But it's definitely interesting to get the insights.
Yeah, and I think I'd love to do more of that over the next year or two with that event, because I think people do find it interesting to see how things work out there. And the problem is, I've recounted a story of what I've been told at a conference. It's one person's story that doesn't even live in the US. So I appreciate that it might not be a fair sort of summary, but it's interesting getting that perspective and challenging that. And that's what we've always learned by working with the guys across the pond.
No, absolutely, and this is something myself and Dan are trying to move forward off the back of the global tech event that Cadent hosted earlier this year. Is how do we kind of delve into that, particularly the European operators, and understand what they're doing. How do we share some of our insights and become a lot more collaborative across the industry generally, not just about the current process, but also where the opportunities lie with things like AI and data processing and remote surveillance, all of those kind of emerging technologies. There's plenty of scope to move it forward, but I think what we want to try and avoid as much as possible is just duplicating something that's already been trialed or is already in place elsewhere. So it's really interesting to get some of that kind of North America insight. It just plenty of opportunity to kind of take it forward and see what else is out there.
It could be that something that's tried in a different marketplace that didn't work, or at the wrong time. You just don't know. But
no.
I think one thing's for certain, that however long I've been in this industry, we've been looking for that silver bullet, and it doesn't exist. So you've got to build those little bits all over the place. So there's lots of opportunity to do lots of little bits, but I think that's the solution. It's not going to be one big bang. It's going to be lots of little things.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that, because in the next episode we'll be talking to some of our operational colleagues, and I think that'll really bring to life how one size just doesn't fit all, in terms of certainly the triage and response to plant protection and how we manage risk. It's not appropriate to just have a one size fits all, and yeah, tease out some of the kind of the context behind that. Fantastic. So I guess final question from us as we look to the future, Richard, what's your take on kind of where we're going with this as an industry, and does it look like a bright future for damage prevention?
Yeah, well, I'd have to say so. I mean, I think when you look back of where we've come from with, certainly in our world of LSBud, the numbers are pretty steady on an increase. You can add 250,000 searches in a year, and you go, fantastic, isn't that brilliant? But there's lots more to do, and so I'm conscious of answering that from an LSBud perspective and an industry perspective, because they are part of the same thing, but there's a much bigger. We're a small cog in a big machine. So I think what I'd certainly like to see in the future is better damage reporting, because we take part and we really support USAG, as I said earlier on, the Utility Strike Avoidance Group. It's a free of charge, a voluntary organisation, and what we've done there is provide a database for people to upload their damages to. And what we really want is people to do that, because if they can do that, we can get a really good perspective of what's happening across industry. Yeah. So often I've heard this 60,000 strikes a year, and it's a great to have a statistic, but it's not true. I can absolutely, if anyone wants to challenge me on that, I'm happy to have a very long and dull conversation.
Future podcast,
mate. Yeah. But yeah, I think it was originally sourced in 2012, so it's hugely out of date. But I think it was an estimate at the time. And what we want to do is say, what are the numbers now? How many strikes actually are there? Ideally, how many near misses there are? But I think let's just go with strikes for now, because the future world that I see is that we know what's gone on, so we know when there's been a strike. We can reference that back to what someone did before that strike, and we get cleverer and cleverer in terms of predicting it going forward. And when you think about how, as I said before, 650 million interactions every year, the numbers add up really quickly in terms of how you can reduce risk for people. And if that's just one person that can't go back to their family every year, that's well worth it, and that is well worth everyone putting their data in and helping the industry benefit.
I think it's that link between, so you touched on digging up written, that's just the inquiry end. What you want to link is the numbers of inquiries, the number of excavations, to then the number of damages, and draw that link between different types of works leading to certain types of damages, and then you almost get like an incident frequency rate or a damage frequency rate that you can then say, actually challenging your pragmatic approach and saying, well, actually, your numbers are saying something else, and it's getting to that place and getting it into a format where we can actually really analyze it and say, we need to make a change here, we need to do something differently in this space because of the frequency rate. So yeah, it's really important that we move to that place.
Definitely, Dan, I couldn't agree with you more. And that's as having a chat before about AI, and AI can be used on big data sets, but we're probably way before AI is needed.
Not quite.
Yeah, we could probably do that with our own
couple of pivot tables.
Exactly. But I think whether that's, as a simple example, just to give it some context, if you could get the strikes on fencing activity with agricultural fencing. Now, I'd hazard a guess it's probably in March, April time in spring, when the ground's getting a bit better, when that would normally be an expectation, but we don't know. We don't know across the country when it normally happens. So if we could do that, even if that was the only output, then, okay, when you speak to landowners, you go, end of February, there's a hard-hitting male shot.
Yeah.
And then you can start, even when it's not predictive, nothing special, let's just have the data, let's use our what tools we have to help mitigate and reduce risk as a result of that.
That can also potentially inform some of your surveillance activities as well, particularly with your high-risk assets. Are there certain times of year, be it ditch clearance, draining, deep ploughing, that kind of stuff, where actually you need to be more vigilant. We need to be out there more from a surveillance perspective. So there's kind of like two lenses, both proactive and reactive, I guess.
Definitely, and you can do that in modelling generally, but you can also bring it in the weather forecast, couldn't you? If you go, okay, we're going to pitch this when the weather's about to turn, and we can have a fairly accurate 2-week forecast, and bang, it goes out on that 2-week forecast, because it's relatively predictable with agriculture in that respect.
Well, plenty to think about. So thanks for joining us today, Richard. It's been really insightful.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, looking ahead to our next episode, we'll be bringing in colleagues from across the Cadent footprint, hearing their stories and insights from managing third-party works on the ground, carrying out surveillance and responding to the potential threats. So stay tuned, stay safe. Please share this with your teams and colleagues across your organisation and wider industry.